Good morning. I'm Darrell West, Vice President of Governance Studies and Director of the Center for Technology Innovation at the Brookings Institution. So I'd like to welcome you to our discussion on video streaming and digital content delivery. So we are webcasting this event, so we'd like to welcome our viewers from around the country and those watching from outside the United States. We are archiving this, so anyone who would like to view this after today will have an opportunity through the Brookings website at brookings.edu. We also have set up a Twitter feed at hashtag TechCTI. That's hashtag TechCTI. So if you wish to post any comments during the forum or pose any questions, you are welcome to do so. Now, we all know that today is a time of great change in telecommunications. There are new digital platforms that have emerged that stream videos and voice over the internet and deliver content via tablets and smartphones. And these systems have expanded the multi-platform mix for communications, entertainment, and commerce. And at the same time, an Internet of Things based on sensors and machine-to-machine communication offers the potential to forge new relationships between customers and businesses. So there are many opportunities in this move to a multi-platform world. Today, we have put out a paper that looks at the future of video streaming. Hopefully, each of you were able to pick up a copy on the way in. If not, they are out on the table outside. And for our web audience, the paper is at the Brookings website at brookings.edu. And just briefly, we argue that there are a number of different models with the potential to become more flexible, adaptive, and cost-effective. But government officials need to promote innovation that maximizes the benefits of new developments. We need to make sure that vulnerable populations are able to reap the benefits of the technology revolution. And today we're going to be hearing from people who operate in different parts of this new ecosystem to get some of their ideas about the path forward. So we brought together an outstanding panel of experts to discuss these topics. To my immediate right is John Donovan, who's the Senior Executive Vice President at AT&T Technology and Network Operations. He is responsible for the company's technology and global network, including the company's mobile broadband network. His responsibilities include oversight of the company's global information and network technology strategy, network planning and operations, and global supply chain. That actually sounds like 3 or 4 jobs, but yeah. I'm sure on some days it probably seems that way too. Derek Aberle serves as president of Qualcomm Incorporated. And in that position, he's responsible for oversight of all the business divisions across the organization, as well as the company's global market development and marketing groups. He serves as a member of the company's executive committee and helps to drive the firm's overall global strategy. And prior to his current role, he served as Executive Vice President of Qualcomm Incorporated and Group President, as well as President of Qualcomm Technology Licensing. And he was responsible for overseeing the company's technology and IP licensing business, as well as its earlier stage businesses in wireless health, platform display, and wireless charging. Jeremy Legg is Senior Vice President of Business Development and Multi-Platform Distribution for Turner Broadcasting. He oversees the product distribution strategy and is responsible for digital content rights acquisition and developing content strategies. He spearheads business development with technical and digital partners and helps to implement the company's TV Everywhere strategy across Turner's portfolio of networks. He previously served as VP of Business Strategy and Development for AOL Incorporated, and there he was responsible for developing and maintaining strategic alliances with telecom and broadband providers. And in the interest of full disclosure, I also should let you know Jeremy is a former student of mine from Brown University. I can't really tell you anything about his academic performance because that, of course, is protected by federal privacy laws. But I can tell you he was well above average in his performance.
He actually agreed to go back and redo some of my grades for participating on the panel. happy about
It's
that.
amazing what you can do on these retroactive things. But obviously he's done very well since Brown. But I'd like to start with John. We obviously have seen an explosion of video streaming. The way in which people consume digital media is changing very dramatically. So the question for you is, what does this mean for internet networks? How are the networks evolving to meet the skyrocketing demand?
Well, I think that there are a number of things that are coming together that really change everything about networking and the technology that underlies it. If you look since, let's just say the last 6 years, the growth in mobile is up about 50,000% on our network. So you start to say, okay, well, I have a giant trend towards mobile. Then you look and you say, well, now video is there. Video is exploding as the primary use of the network. Globally, it's over 50% of network consumption, and we at AT&T and collectively as a U.S. market tend to lead a number of those trends. And so there's a video explosion. You mentioned earlier the Internet of Things, which is a very different kind of network. It's small chatty packets running up and down. So I have these big sticky bits of video. I have these little chatty packets. I have everything moving from the ground to the air. So we have been forced to fundamentally rethink the technology that delivers it. We've had to change most of the processes that we manage internally because the speed and the pace of change that's happening in the consumer and business marketplace. And importantly, our people have to change. We've spent, we're a company that I think Brookings Institute in a couple of years is going to be 100. It's a baby. We're 136. So, you have legacy and people do things certain ways. We now have to go back and retool a workforce that's near 250,000 strong to go do things in this new environment. So it's challenging in every dimension: the people, the way we manage the business, and then the underlying technology that we build.
Okay, excellent. So Derek, John was mentioning this explosion of mobile. You, of course, are in the middle of the mobile revolution, and we've seen an explosion of mobile traffic, not just in entertainment, but education, healthcare, and a number of other areas. So how are mobile companies responding to this traffic increase, and how is it affecting the capacity part of it?
Well, I guess we're probably the relative baby in the room. Qualcomm's only about 30 years old. And we've seen actually a tremendous change in the industry over the last 10 years. When you think about your smartphone, just over the last 5 years, how much that has progressed in terms of the computing power and the data speeds, as well as just the ability to do video well on these devices. All these trends are kind of coming together at the same time. And so we're working very hard across the industry to help address the explosion in data traffic, the move to mobile. And even within our own space, as we think about kind of the core for Qualcomm, historically has really been more around smartphones and tablets. But now you're seeing this really expand out into new verticals like automotive and healthcare, the Internet of Things. So when you fast forward to the future, the demands on the network are just going to increase over time. So we put a lot of investment in the network side of technology as well, and that's a big part of the focus for us. Is in addition to obviously needing more spectrum to satisfy all of this demand, there's a lot of innovation left ahead in terms of driving new technology on the network side, and so we've got a pretty tremendous amount of investment there, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about that a little bit more today. But those are the technologies that I think we'll need, to complement what has been done on the mobile innovation, really to help drive the network forward as we move ahead.
Okay, so Jeremy, you focus on entertainment. You are one of the leading content providers between HBO and Turner Broadcasting itself. What is the state of content distribution now, and how are these multi-platforms being used in distribution?
I guess what isn't changing in content distribution at this point? I'm the guy that's making their lives difficult by cramming all the video onto these pipes. So I mean, everything from the advertising models that we have in terms of how we aggregate audiences and we sell advertising, it's forcing us to look at almost becoming distributors in a certain way. As TV Everywhere has progressed and we now distribute through our own applications as well as those of our distribution partners, we're distributing the video ourselves. We didn't used to do that. We're now having to look at becoming more of a software company. We were a content creation company that's migrating to be a content creation company that's also a software company. We're looking at an industry from a distribution perspective that's obviously consolidating, right? I mean, the number of pay TV homes has kind of flattened out. There aren't candidly that many more pay TV homes to get. So you naturally end up with situations where there's industry consolidation that begins to happen as well. So, from 1 week to the next, my job changes depending on which part of the company that we're actually talking to. But I will say that, at the end of the day, for the consumer, the number of choices that they have as to where they want to watch and how they want to watch is simply expanding more and more. I mean, we are simulcasting our television feeds on iPhones, on Android devices, through Xboxes, through other connected devices that aren't just set-top boxes as we've traditionally done over the history of the television industry. The way we acquire rights from studios has changed. The analogy that I basically have been using when asked a question like this is that we've essentially created a parallel universe. We distribute our video through the managed video network in the last mile historically. Now we're distributing essentially that same set of content through the broadband pipe over the last mile as well. For the consumer at the end of the day, they don't really care about the distinctions between the two things. However, the devices that render that content do care about the distinction between those things. So you're ending up with a software layer on the devices that render the video, whether it's coming from the managed video network or it's coming from the broadband network, that we now have to be very attuned to because it impacts advertising and measurement and content delivery in ways that it didn't used to.
So I'll throw out a question for the entire panel, and any of you want to jump in can do so. Each of you have talked about the investments in the network that each of your companies is doing, and I'm just curious how you see the future of broadband and mobile in terms of content delivery. What are the investments you're making in the network, and how is this affecting the consumer experience? Any of you who want to address that? And don't everybody speak at once.
Yeah, no.
So.
I think they're doing that based on capital budgets. Over the last 6 years, we spent $119 billion in capital transforming our network, and I think that's the largest number of any company in America. And we're not the lone rangers. I mean, the entire industry is moving down this path, and I think the investment profile changes, and as strange as it sounds with that large number every year, it's really a challenge to fit the wants and needs of this transformation into that large bucket of capital that we spend. I'll also point out that the challenge isn't, investing out in front of technology, as these guys can tell you. Technology gets cheaper by 1.5% every month. You can see what's coming. So you sort of have to balance it. The right technology at the right time is what you need to land. And so it's a very big challenge, because when we move to an app-driven economy, when Jeremy's company says they're a software company, I used to be able to say, I have so many of these devices, they look like this, they consume that, and now you hit a don't walk sign in the city, and all of a sudden I have megabytes of demand that are there. Now the light turns green, it says walk, and then poof, everybody puts their phone back in their pocket, walks across the street, and my demand just vanished. So it's a big challenge to try to get these things right, both geographically, time of day, and to manage this investment in a way that you're catching a consumer demand that is a combination of a big tsunami wave that we talked about earlier, but then this day-to-day change that the software companies are driving.
So Derek, how do you see the future of broadband and mobile?
I think pretty similarly. I would say our investment is really, in this space, mostly focused around trying to develop technologies that most efficiently allow companies like John to use their spectrum. And so we're looking at things like densifying the network through what you've heard of as small cell deployments, and really helping to get the user closer to the base station. We have a lot of investment in things like what we call carrier aggregation technology, which allows the operators to use kind of disparate bits of their spectrum aggregated together to drive more capacity. And then some unique things around broadcast too. I think that's an area that we think in the future could be pretty interesting. Not having a dedicated broadcast channel or network even, but something that's dynamically adjustable for various events or scenarios where you want to deliver one piece of content to a large group of people instead of it multiple times over individual streams. So, we're looking at a lot of those things to really help. Spectrum is an important thing. We will need more spectrum. But then being able to use that spectrum as efficiently as possible is really kind of where we focus the network investments at Qualcomm.
Jeremy, how do you see the future?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously make far fewer network investments than John does, for example. But we're making investments in places that 5 years ago I don't think anyone ever thought we would. So we're making investments in CDNs and CDN capacity. We never thought that we would do that. For an example, is we recently broadcast March Madness. I hope all of you watched. We appreciate your viewing. But we did about 69 million video streams just online for March Madness in this year's tournament. We have to figure out a way to deliver that video. That's just through the app. That's not television viewing or time-shifted viewing on DVRs. We never thought that we were going to be in a position to try and have 69 million live video streams of basketball. We're fortunate that we are, but it creates challenges about how we do it. So the types of streaming relationships that we have with CDNs or MLB BAM or iStream Planet or other companies that provide streaming services, as well as building out software layers on the end consumer devices. I mean, that's really the place where probably the biggest technology investments are going on. We have to render this on an iPhone. We have to render it on an Android. We have to render it on a Windows phone. We have to figure out ways to insert advertising into all of those associated platforms, as well as plug them into all kinds of different elements of social media, so the consumers utilize. We have to build basically experiences that are device specific. When a consumer watches something on an iPhone or a tablet, they don't just want the same experience that they otherwise would have on a television set. They want to use the form factors of the devices to do things that you can't do on television sets presently. Well, that takes software engineering to be able to do that. So, those are the big places that we're making investments beyond the obvious things that we do around investing in content rights.
It also forges some new kinds of partnerships. I remember back when you first made the decision to do that, you guys called us and said, we want this to be a really good experience. And it was during the time when our network wasn't performing real well through the explosive growth that we saw. And we had to sit down, and I remember the joint planning meetings at the time. I was the chief technology officer, to say, okay, what's the app going to do? What's it going to behave like? And you don't know which teams are going to win, so you don't know where your demand's going to be. But we had to sit and say, okay, well, let's plan it out, and how do you do it, and what things can you do to be more efficient on the network, to improve the experience for everybody? How can we manage the network? And those were conversations. I remember when you first called, it was like, what? What are you guys doing in the network business? But as long as I have you on the phone, can we get you to fiber feed into our super head offices, because we think we can make the video quality on the linear TV better, right? And we kind of work through a bunch of dimensions, because as you say, you drive a lot of the demand onto the network, and there are choices that you make that, if they are harmonized with the choices we make, it just makes for a better experience.
It's a great point. I mean, even just how we promote on television to what devices we drive consumers to have an impact on him. For example, I'm sure none of you do this, but the Thursday opening round game that starts at about noon, when you pretend you're eating lunch, but you're not really, and you've got your desktop open. Well, that's putting a burden on a different set of networks than when you go home later and watch it at home. Or if you happen to be out of the office and you're watching it on a mobile device, well, that's a different form of delivery. And so you have to plan against all of those different things. And what Charles Barkley says on air, if he says, go to your iPhone, people do. And so then all of a sudden it changes, how consumers view it.
So we're seeing much greater demands on the networks. Derek, you mentioned this spectrum problem. So could you talk a little bit about the nature of that problem and how we can address that? What do you see as the things we need to do?
Well, I think it's probably multifaceted. As I said before, we're basically, we believe we do need more spectrum. We see this explosive, demand coming, whether it's video or other data. John gave some stats on how quickly the data has grown on mobile, and we throw out this thing that we talk about as the 1000x data challenge over the next 10 years. And you can really only get there through a combination of, you can't just get there with spectrum, and you can't just get there with new technology. It's going to have to be a combination of the two. And so that's really what we try to focus on, driving the right decision from a spectrum standpoint, but then also having the technologies available to make that spectrum really, really efficient. And the small cell and densification of the network, is a big piece of what we think is important. I think AT&T is really leading there as well. But it's going to be a whole suite of different technology solutions, I think, given all of the dynamics that are playing out in terms of the uncertainty of where the data is going to be delivered or the content is going to be delivered over the various kinds of networks. And we're just really trying to be there both on the mobile side as well as technologies that help improve the efficiency.
And John, what are the barriers that you see?
Well, you start with spectrum. Spectrum is the oxygen. Nothing lives without it in the mobile world, so you have to start there. And then I think that the technology evolution is a managed process. We do the stuff in the infrastructure, and in the infrastructure, we still have in wireless 2G networks out there, and people that are very fond of phones or alarm systems that are set up on 2G. And right now, I'm getting an order of magnitude more efficiency on my latest network, LTE. So there's how do you migrate customers to free up capacity so that you can continue to meet the ever-growing demand. So there's that dimension. And then the earlier point that I made is really relevant here, is that the ecosystem that decides what people want to do needs to be a participant and an actor in the play. You can't just simply throw something up and have it generate ineffectively the demand for video. And so there's the technology of software, there's the technology at the app layer. That's an important dimension that's not well understood right now, because it interacts with the network, and in fact, a lot of the network performance now is driven by the decisions that software developers or application developers make, as much as it is the network that I have and the capacity. But to Derek's point, the lifeblood is spectrum. It's not only the capacity, it's also the performance of the network. So it is central.
So Jeremy, on the content provider side, what are the biggest challenges that you see and the things that are
at the highest level, the biggest challenge is that the television industry is essentially now distributing content on devices that we don't make or control. Historically, we've distributed it through set-top boxes, which our distribution partner, while they may not have owned those companies, significantly influenced how that hardware was built. And it was generally built in a relatively consistent way across the different distributors. We're now in a position where decisions that Apple makes impacts us, decisions that Microsoft makes impacts us. And we don't necessarily have control over those decisions, and in most cases we don't have control over those types of decisions. So it opens up then this whole universe of business problems and technology problems that are, we are only recently now beginning to confront. So things like, how do you measure the advertising? How do I I'm selling advertising on a television set for March Madness, but I'm also selling it online. How do I aggregate the viewers? How do I communicate to an advertiser where their ads ran and who actually watched them? It's very different systems and very different ways of distributing video to those folks. It also creates problems as it relates to what business models you're going to distribute the video under. So TV Everywhere is a business model where it's free to the end consumer on all of these associated mobile devices. There's no incremental fee as long as they're paying their underlying television subscription. Well, those are two entirely different systems. Historically, your set-top box was a conditional access system, right? I mean, you turned it on, and essentially all that set-top box did was verify if you paid your bill. And if you didn't pay your bill, you got the scrambled feed, and if you did pay your bill, you got the channels that you subscribed to. Well, iPhones don't have that conditional access system. Xboxes don't have that conditional access system. So you have to build it, and you have to build it at a software and app layer, device to device. And Apple has some very definitive ideas about how iOS is going to work, and Google has very definitive ideas about how Android is going to work. And there are lots of demands upon those companies from all kinds of, they're not just video delivery platforms. They have all kinds of different software that lives and rides on those, and so they have all kinds of decisions that they have to make how they're going to operate those operating systems or build those operating systems and make available the software development tools. So these are challenges which we feel that we've done a pretty good job meeting, but at the same time they've been big challenges. They aren't things that the industry I sit in have traditionally had to confront.
So John, we're obviously in the middle of this big technology transformation in terms of content networks. AT&T is in the midst of an IP transition from copper wires to fiber optics. You have 2 experiments running in West Delray Beach and also Carbon Hill, Alabama. So how can we protect consumers during this time of transformation, particularly senior citizens, the disabled, people who live in rural areas, people who in certain cases may still depend on copper wires for emergency services?
Yeah, let me start by saying that the technology evolution exists for all of our platforms. So in television, more and more is coming over the top, more and more is being streamed. I have an architectural change that we've got to make. You look at the mobile network, I talked about 2G to 3G to LTE, that technology. Now, in the wired network, and by the way, the average packet in a mobile network only travels now 2.3 miles. When I arrived at AT&T six years and 2 months ago, but who's counting? It was about a little over 5 miles. So to Derek's earlier point, we're serving from closer and closer, so it's becoming more and more of a wired network. So what you highlight is in the wired network, what's the evolution? And the evolution is moving into an IP world. And already the services that IP can provide are better, and they're being voted on by the customers. In large quantities, we're losing the old landlines and rotary phones that were really the foundation of our business. The customers are migrating away from those at a pretty torrid pace. And so what we're trying to do in a couple of jurisdictions is, under a microscope, look at how one would manage the transition, providing a service that is equal to in all regard, but better in many, many ways, and then manage through the transition that one takes. So it's no different when someone had to give up their StarTAC, when we went from analog to digital and mobile, and it's going to be no different 2 years from now when they have to give up their flip phone and go towards more of a smartphone feature. There are going to be some transitions, and we picked a couple of geographies where it had characteristics that we wanted to look at. The mix of consumer, the demographics of the consumer, and the trajectory that it was on. And what we want to see is, what do we need to do to facilitate a soft landing in those environments? And so what we've started in each of those, an intense dialogue with the community. We let them know what we were doing. We let them know why we were doing it. We let them know the benefits of it. And now we have to manage through a multi-year transition where we get our technology ready, but we also importantly figure out how we care for customers, how we explain the transition, look at how they view this transition to make sure that it's comfortable for them. So it's one of for each of our platforms, it's one of the big technology evolutions that we've got to get our cost structure right, to give people the capacity they need for this insatiable desire to do the things that are becoming commonplace in the household.
So Derek, we're also seeing an expansion in terms of machine-to-machine communication. There's growing use of sensors and various types of wearable devices. What are the opportunities that you see in those areas, and how is that going to affect the consumer experience?
I think if you look at it, there's been some discussion in the last year or so about whether innovation is actually slowing down in our space, and we see exactly the opposite, which is there has been a tremendous amount of innovation in the devices that we carry around with us every day. As I said at the beginning, how quickly that has come across has been pretty remarkable. But now you're going to continue to see innovation there, as well as just many, many more connections. And we are already seeing very good adoption of mobile technologies into the automotive sector. And healthcare is an area that we spent a lot of time on over the last 5+ years. That's starting to really take off as well. And then just even the many sensors. We talk about sort of this notion of digital sixth sense, where there's going to be many sensors around you in your environment that you're constantly interacting with. And really the technologies that are going to drive that are ones that make the information relevant and useful, so that you're not bombarded with so much data that none of it is useful. And I think there's going to be tremendous innovation there in terms of utilizing all of the connections and the sensors that are available to drive unique user experiences in the future. And there's some platforms that us and others have been investing in to really help drive that.
And Jeremy, does any of this affect what you're doing on the content side in terms of machine-machine, the emerging Internet of Things, sensors? Does this affect how you're thinking about the future?
Well, we hope people watch television through their clothes. It would be another way to aggregate viewing. But the Internet of Things from a video perspective doesn't impact us as much as it obviously would these guys' companies. But the thing that is impacting us in terms of the proliferation of access points is that we're having to change the way we acquire rights, and in some cases change the types of content that we make available to people. There's been an expectation set now for consumers that they're going to have access to an entire season of a show, whether they're standing on the moon or they're in the middle of Manhattan. They want to be able to have every device, whatever one they're watching on, to know where they left off. So if they left off 20 minutes in on this device, they want to pick up this other device, have that device recognize them automatically, and pick up at minute 21. I understand why they want all these things. I want them too. But it's partnership with companies like these in order to actually make some of those things happen. You have to, there's a level of data that we all need access to in order to deliver those types of experiences. You have to know who the person is. You don't have to know their name and their address, but you have to have an identifier effectively to be able to deliver video to consumers across these platforms, to deliver those types of experiences to them. It also is changing the way that a lot of programming is worked. So historically, you've seen a lot of repeats on television. The stacking of seasons in the current season, which is obviously something that Netflix has probably popularized the most, is generally serialized programming. One episode, it's a Game of Thrones kind of scenario. One episode builds upon another episode, builds upon another episode. Well, that actually changes the way we program our networks, because serialized programming doesn't repeat very well, right? You watch that episode, you're unlikely to go back and watch it again. Well, that means that there's another space you have to fill on that network. You can't run a rerun of a show that someone might watch twice, because they're only going to watch that show that one time. That has actually fairly dramatic impacts upon the type of programming we choose, how we program it, where we make it available, and how we monetize it, right? I mean, your monetization opportunity on a serialized show is different than it is on a procedural show, which Law and Order or something like that. People will watch any episode of Law and Order from season 15 to season 9 to, it's just if it happens to be on. So all of those things have, big impacts to us in terms of how we program those networks, where those networks are made available.
Actually, we don't have that problem at Brookings. We find people watch our panels time and time again.
Again. That's good.
They just love it.
Yes.
But
Perfect application for broadcast.
exactly. I have one last question for the panel, and then I'll open the floor to questions from the audience. And that concerns the recruitment of workers for this new world in which we are encountering. And so I'm just curious how you're finding the workers. Are there shortages in particular areas? And how, as a country, we should try and improve this STEM pipeline?
Well, I mentioned earlier, I'm not a worrier, but I lose sleep over having to transform 150,000 people in technology of a 245,000 person company and pivot their skills. And you can't just say, it's the new, well, let's go get a bunch of new folks. I have people that built our company that have been there 30 years. They have degrees in mathematics from the best schools, and now to say we're going into, you need to be a big data scientist. This isn't training. This is reskilling at the fundamental level. And so now I've got to take a person and say, you are 300 hours away from being relevant. How do you fit that in? Do you have the will to do it? Do you have the skill to do it? And those for me, that literally is the biggest problem within AT&T in this big transformation that we've got, because our demand alone, if we said out with the old, in with the new, would create a problem on a national level, because you don't have 150,000 people of these skills ready to deploy. And so we as a company, and I don't want to say it's just technology, the 150,000, 243,000, we're doing massive technologically advanced programs collectively with other companies, selectively ourselves, and with the latest technology of massive open online courses with universities to do a reskilling. And this reskilling right now is one of the biggest programs I've ever seen in my life.
Derek?
I think there's a number of interesting challenges that we face. We're obviously a global company, and we've got, I think, I don't know what the exact stat is, but more than 2/3 of our employees are engineers. And the skill sets, to John's point, that are important to us, they do shift around. But more importantly, just attracting the best and the brightest people to fill those spots. There's a tremendous amount of competition worldwide now, for the best talent. And for us, we just need to make sure that the rules are in place and the framework is in place to allow us to attract the best people, no matter where they're from. And that's an area I think that we continue to focus on. And it's not easy for us to, I think there's some companies where the skill sets maybe are a little more fungible, where you can scale up and down your workforce rather quickly, or move skill sets around. And for us, that's a pretty challenging thing, given the types of employees that we need to drive our technology.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I think on our side, it's, we're having to hire a type of employee that we haven't had to hire previously. We're hiring software engineers. We need software engineers. If you want to attend a meeting that's somewhat amusing, is you put creative people from the studios in the room with the software engineers, right? And they talk about how they're going to distribute content, what types of content they're going to make. We never used to have meetings like that. It was, okay, I'm going to create this show. It's going to get broadcast over the satellite, and it's going to be on people's television sets. Now the creative people are sitting with the software engineers and saying, well, I want the show to do this, but then I want all this metadata attached to the show so that the consumer can do this and do this and do this. So it's just a radically different way of approaching what types of people you're going to have in the company. So we've done a whole host of things, right? We've had reach outs with our local Atlanta community to try and foster the development of wireless engineers, partnerships with Georgia Tech and other local universities. We've opened a San Francisco office that we now staff with software engineers. We look now across the globe in terms of how we deliver content and where we're going to source these types of employees from. We don't have an insatiable appetite for software engineers, but we have a pretty strong one, and I don't see that changing, in the future. That same transition is happening from our distribution partners, as John talked about. We have a very big relationship with AT&T on the UVerse side, as well as with Comcast and others. If you've seen recently what Comcast has deployed with their X1, X2 platform, some of the things that AT&T UVerse has deployed with their platform, there's a big application software layer associated with that. And that's the type of employee that the industry is targeting, and there aren't enough of them.
Okay, let's move to questions from the audience. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. There's a gentleman in the back. And we'd ask you to give your name and your organization, and no speeches, questions, please. Yes, microphone's on.
Thanks. Neutrality ruling in this whole discussion. And for John, with Netflix signing the SLAs with Comcast, with Verizon, do you see the same trend applying to the wireless side too? And what's the implication, especially on the capacity side for other users on a quality of service basis? The second part, which is for the entire panel, just your philosophy on the areas ruling, which is being litigated in the Supreme Court.
On the first part of the question, I mean, there's a lot of details about the recent FCC activity that we just have to learn about. We're in discussions with Netflix, and certainly are in the midst of the dialogue. And so I feel like we have always been at AT&T an advocate of an open and transparency and and an open internet, and we have been supportive all along. We reiterated that support last year. So there's a lot of details we need to learn, and we'll have a view once we see those details.
I didn't really hear the second part of that question.
Aereo.
Oh, it was Aereo.
Supreme Court.
Yeah, on the Aereo side of things, as a content provider, it's obviously hard to look at that and think that someone can essentially take your networks without a license and start to distribute them. From a Time Warner perspective, we have cable networks, not broadcast networks, so we're not part of that component of the case. But I think the decision the Supreme Court makes here as it relates to cloud DVRs and the distribution of that has the potential to have a pretty profound impact upon how networks are packaged and how they're distributed. And so we're waiting just like everyone else to see what that ruling actually is.
Other questions? Someone right back there.
Hi, my name's Ua. I'm in the Communication, Culture, and Technology program at Georgetown. And I have a question. We've been talking a lot about investments and consumers. And what role do colleges and universities have as consumers? Or should they be themselves content providers? And what type of interactions and collaboration should we see?
The interactions that we have with universities as it relates to the content that we produce and the content that people consume there is generally fairly specific to a number of our brands. So, the Adult Swim brand, for example, is quite popular amongst the millennial generation. We have a lot of CNN content distribution through CNN Student News and other things that we do through universities. It's always been a challenge to distribute content through universities because they've essentially been private networks in terms of how we actually get content to the universities themselves. The internet is actually providing some interesting mechanisms to be able to now distribute content to universities, as well as have packages of networks that are packaged in slightly different ways than we would have to a general household, for example, that we now are starting to make available through universities.
But what about the flip side of that? Universities as possible content providers.
Well,
everybody wants to be a content provider today.
That's happening today. If you look, the University of Texas has the Longhorn Network that they've launched. The SEC has launched a network. And so in the beginning, you start around sports because sports is the most real-time oriented, on the higher value end of the spectrum. But I think just generally, as I don't produce the content, and I'll maybe get reprimanded here by Jeremy, but there's just more of a fragmentation of the kind of content that you want to see. So there's a lot of viewership at 60 and 100,000, and where it's very niche oriented. Whether it's a sports team, we think of it, the Washington Redskins here, is certainly a far bigger audience than it might be for Georgetown field hockey. But there is an audience for a lot of this type of content. And so the better we...
You haven't seen the Redskins lately, I don't think.
I'm a Steelers fan. You're right. But I think as we get better at curating and recommenders and understanding context to present in a simple form things that you're likely to watch, then all of this complexity can fall. And I think that's really... There's business models attached to history and complexity, and what you're talking about today is a new world, and in this new world, we have to start with the familiar, address the business models, and walk our way to the new, and that's really the march that we're on.
Yeah, I don't think I answered your question. I didn't understand your question in that context. I mean, the places where students and particularly young people are participating in the content generation process has largely been through MCNs. Folks like Maker Studios, obviously YouTube is providing a significant amount of that. So content companies like ourselves certainly look to that, both for relationships with some of that talent, as well as ideas for programming that we might think makes sense to bring up to the next level of distribution, whether it be through our networks or through on demand. Studios in particular, if you look at some of the things that Warner Brothers does, is trying to embrace that audience. We recently just made a big announcement about a relationship with Machinima. Enormous amounts of user-generated content that are flowing through that as well. So it's increasingly, it's both a source of content and a source of relationships that we traditionally haven't pursued, but it's also increasingly becoming a new distribution platform for content itself. So it's inbound and outbound. These are essentially now content platforms that you interact directly with consumers on.
Yeah, and I think our expectation too is that just throughout education, there's going to be more of a shift to the use of mobile technology as well as video, and in particular in the emerging regions where we don't have as much infrastructure in place today, and most people, they're getting their first access to mobile or to broadband through a mobile broadband connection. We do think there'll be more content delivered through those channels related to education.
In the very back, there's a question.
I'm John Lippman from the International Broadcasting Bureau. Is there any country around the world that's doing it right or that we should look to as the model for video streaming content delivery? South Korea?
In all honesty, I think people are looking to us. It's not that other countries aren't pursuing this. I mean, certainly some of the more wired countries like South Korea, for example, have made enormous strides, particularly in the gaming category, and some of the content that they produce there. But a lot of the business models around media and content distribution get established here, and then are kind of transported through licensing arrangements and content licensing arrangements with distributors internationally. We're doing as good a job as anyone, I can say that. I mean, the amount of investment that's going into this space domestically is enormous. Our international operations are making significant investments in this as well. But it's hard. I mean, this is, I go back to my point about, distributing on devices that we don't make. And that is a pervasive problem across the world. It's not one that's just limited to the United States.
You had a follow-up on that?
How about from a technology point of view?
I'll take that from a technology point of view. I think the United States is leading. And this isn't the sort of crowd where you're going to jump into deep technology, but earlier this year we announced we were going to software-defined networking, which was heretofore was only done inside data centers by web-savvy companies, and we announced we're going to take the entire wide area network and transform to a software-defined networking. The entire world is watching. There's a real interest that the rest of the globe has in how we resolve this problem, because we have more willing combatants, if you will, that are in the game. We have a lot more dialogue, but really importantly, we've made the investment. And if you look, I mean, for us, a pro-investment environment, when you're making investments that run a decade, is really important. And so when you have the ability of players to lead an investment cycle, the axis of technology in wireless, and I'll be interested to see if Derek agrees with this, I think shifted from Europe and Asia to the United States. And I think it's in the last 5 years. And I think the wireless world now centers around the United States. And I think the innovations that are occurring in there are predominantly led by the technology community in the United States.
Okay, Derek, your opportunity to agree or disagree.
I would say I largely agree. I do think that, especially the shift from 3G to LTE, the U.S. really did take, a significant leadership position in mobile as compared to kind of where Europe sat historically. South Korea and Japan obviously have always, pushed technology, but I do think when you look at, the services and all the other stuff that's been put together here in the U.S., we really have put ourselves in a leadership position. From our standpoint, kind of where we sit in the ecosystem, things have shifted around a little bit. I would say that outside of Qualcomm, there really aren't too many U.S. companies investing in a lot of this core technology, and some of that investment has shifted more to Asia over the last few years. But on sort of the operator side, I would agree with John.
So you mentioned, if I could just follow up on that question, you mentioned South Korea and Japan as places that have led in the past. Are there things we could learn from them, either on the public sector side or just how the countries are thinking about innovation in general?
Well, I think they have one advantage, which is geographically they're quite a bit smaller. And so it allows them, I think, to move their networks in some cases more quickly than ours. But I don't know, John may disagree with that.
No, I don't at all.
Yeah, there's way too much agreement on this.
Yeah, well, you can pick other subjects like IP and stuff, and we'll disagree a lot. But I do think that some of the countries that we might, for a short period of time, get technology envy over, really it's just the evolution of who's the first in the water on the next wave. And so if you have a wireless network that has the number of subscribers that are roughly equivalent to the United States packed into a geography the size of California, then you're going to be able to justify anything. Small fractions multiplied by large numbers over short spaces equals really good investment profile. But I view the health as, what's happening at the user end. Do the users, is it affordable? Are they taking the new stuff on? Is it building an ecosystem? Are the app developers doing the work? But if you look right now at a developer in a garage in Eastern Europe or in India, what's the first market they want their apps to hit? It's this market here. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And I think so that's where I think the health of the ecosystem is best measured, by the proliferation of what we see, by the consumption of it, the affordability. And so you see smartphones, we're very deep into the penetration cycle in the US. You look at apps and usage and the affordability, it's a really, I think it's the global success story on technology and certainly in wireless.
Other questions? Right here. We have a microphone coming up to you.
Hi, I'm Larry Swader from the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy, one of those new crop of content producers. And my question is about quality and how consumers have accepted the trade-off for access, to increase access, but accepted that drop in quality in terms of music listening or in video content. So I'm wondering how you all think about quality and opportunities for premium experiences.
I guess I'm a little confused by the question. Are you talking about video quality from a technology perspective or
I'm
content
talking about
quality?
video quality and opportunities for better video quality, whether that's new technologies and expanding those to like 3D viewing or just better viewing where streaming, there are no hiccups in the streaming. You mentioned something about picking up where you left off on different devices, but are there other ways of thinking about quality on whether that's on a device or at home or in a special space or maybe it's in a stadium? I don't know. I'm just wondering if there are other ways that you think about quality that might be interesting.
Well, the dilemma that a company like us has is quality, video quality. Let's address that piece specifically. Varies so much. The demand for it varies so much based on the type of event that it is, right, and the scale of the event, right. So in the general entertainment space, a consumer's expectation of quality is very different on an on-demand episode that they watch online, for example, versus something like March Madness, where they want crisp HD video that's going over a mobile device because they're watching their favorite team. We always have the dilemma, and John will certainly probably attest to this, of how much capacity build-out do we do, given that those events where the demand is so high are infrequent, whereas the rest of the time, people are recording it off of a DVR, or they're watching it online, or they're watching it on a mobile device, where there are relatively few people watching as compared to a March Madness event. So what we're having to do is form technology relationships that we didn't previously have, with companies like AT&T and CDNs like Akamai and Limelight and others, in order to actually have special space carved out for us for those events, so that we have the capacity to meet the video quality demands of the particular event. Those are things that we never had to do because we never had to distribute the video. It was always done through our distribution partners, and that's still something that we've done, that we do, a significant, the vast majority of our viewing still comes through those particular platforms, but we're now in a position where we have to figure out how to plan for that across these other types of devices. But consumers' expectations of video quality are so different. For user-generated content, they're willing to watch something that's completely grainy, and those are the things that you get on your phone that people share around all the time. We've even had experiences on YouTube, for example, where consumers actually prefer the video that isn't as high quality as the professionally produced stuff. So we'll be encoding video at these incredibly high bit rates to make available there, but they think the one's cooler that was actually cut off a TV and is a 2-minute clip, that somebody ripped off TV. So it's a very hard problem to solve.
Yeah, I think just as you think about generating content, quality is in the eye of the beholder. So go into the data. There's things that I could tell you that as a person of my age, it's shocking to me. I'll give you an example. Education on video, the smaller the screen, the higher the retention. That blew me away. It blows me away that as we look at that stuff, that you get better results because for some reason, the younger generation, the smaller screen, mentally, they lock in and have more focus. So when you start to look at this, another example is, apps. People don't want financial apps to present instantly because there's a view it must be insecure. They want to see the wheel because they think there's all this security stuff needs to go on. This has got to check with that, and you got to check with that, and we got to make sure this is like hypersensitive. And then you present it, and it's like, whew, thank heavens. So fast is fast, slow is slow, except when you put it all together into an experience for you. When you hit your demographic, you're going to find that quality could be any number of things. And so, my view, my daughter's in the field, and I could advise anything in technology. I told her, get into user design, this interactive design, because that right now is as hot a field as there is anywhere, is to match the content and the purpose with the screen and the user. Neat stuff, really.
So you mentioned small screens. Google Glass, is this for real? Is this going to have any impact on what any of you do?
I got to be honest. I commend the technology, in the sense that they're doing things as it relates to technology that I haven't seen done before. I don't think people are going to watch our shows through Google Glass. I think they're going to pull out their mobile device or they're going to watch them on television. There are probably some applications, for example, in news as it relates to being a content provider for a network like CNN where you can see some applicability there. But from a video content distributor, it's a bit harder to see the fit. I think there are probably other industries, obviously in healthcare and other places, where there's probably a better fit.
As a technologist, the United States put a man on the moon before we put wheels on suitcases, and before we had curved shower curtains that didn't blow and stick to you. So, these moonshot technologies, you love them because what it does is you don't know where it's going to end up, but every once in a while, the hope and dream part of technology and really pushing it brings behind it a whole lot of little things. Netflix did. They had a prize of $1 million for improvement in their recommender algorithm, and folks in our labs won it. And so when you look at this, there were 134 countries represented. The field of recommenders in the mathematical side during that contest grew 36-fold. So was the contest a great idea? Don't know. Did the company get the benefit of it? I don't know. But I love the idea that the data science field, specifically in recommenders, attracted a bunch of mathematicians that wanted to be part of a moonshot. So I love moonshots.
I do think wearables is going to be a big category in the future, but we're so early in the cycle that we don't really know what is going to be the most interesting application. There's going to be a wide range of things there too. And just from a technology standpoint, when you think about the types of things that are being developed, we're doing a lot of work around computer vision and machine-to-machine learning and augmented reality solutions. And so you can see a lot of these pieces coming together. The first ones are never going to be the best ones, but you got to start somewhere. And I think you've seen a lot of interesting things come out over the last year, and they're just going to get more interesting over time.
And one of the biggest innovators in this area actually is the American military in terms of instructional videos, augmented reality, simulations for instructional purposes. I mean, they are ahead of big parts of
They're pretty good
the
at
US.
actual reality, too.
Yes. Other questions? Back there's a gentleman with his hand up.
Hi, thanks for this discussion. I'm Michael Wilker. I'm from the Department of Health and Human Services. Talking a little bit about the future, each of you kind of have a piece of the future. 5 years and 10 years down the road, what is your one or two tips about what you would see as technology that we're just getting a grasp on, and how and content as well, how we'll be watching and learning about things in the future?
Well, I think.
No. I was just going to say, you always get these hard questions, don't you?
Yeah, well, it's like, tell me what's going to happen in 10 years, and I'm struggling to tell you what's going to happen in a couple of months, given the pace of change. But, look, I think, let me attempt to answer that question. We recently released a product called CNNX. And I swear this is not a product pitch, but it's an example of technical capabilities on how consumers can watch, right? You typically would go to CNN.com, you would watch a video clip, you might read a text story associated with the news, and then when you would turn on your television set, you couldn't really interact with the content at all, right? I mean, it's a simulcast feed, you're going to watch it, maybe you DVR'd a particular show or what have you. What we decided to do was to say, okay, we've got to change, the way consumers want to consume news now is changing. They want to be able to get to a specific topic. So what we did is we actually staffed in our studios 24/7 people that annotate the video. Right? A video player doesn't know what the video is, right? So we annotated the video. We then used a cloud DVR to record the network 24/7 and delineate every segment of every show that occurs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. What that now enables the consumer to do is to tune into the simulcasted feed of CNN and go to any segment of any show in real time, literally as it's being said on air. So you want to know what Anderson Cooper was saying 7 minutes ago? It's right there. You want to know what he said 14 minutes ago? It's right there. You just touch it. You can go to that specific segment. And then because the video is annotated, all related content to that particular segment from around the web, from CNN itself, is provided to the consumer, where they can go to the social conversation on Twitter, to the social conversation on Facebook, other companion content, video or text associated with that, and it's all done in real time. So that's an example of how I know we're going to have to think in the future. That applicability of things like that, certainly I can see extending to sports. In the general entertainment category, I basically think consumers want to watch great programming. I think you want to sit down and you want to watch a particular episode and you want it to be great. Game of Thrones is a great series. Consumers like it. We have to figure out how to make those topically relevant years and years from now, but I don't know that the technology changes great storytelling.
Derek, what are you watching for 5 and 10 years down the road?
Not specific to content, but actually, for me personally, I think the place where we could see a tremendous amount of innovation is bringing mobile technologies into healthcare. And we're very early in that cycle right now. But there's been so much focus put on this over the last few years for good reason, both in terms of trying to control cost in the developed regions and increase access in emerging markets, that really I can't see any other platform that can deliver what we need to deliver across the globe in terms of improving healthcare. So I think there'll just be a tremendous amount of investment and innovation that goes into that space over the next 5 years. I don't know exactly what the end state looks like there, but I know it's going to be a lot different than what we have today.
5-year horizon, what I'm most excited about is my things coordinating with each other. I don't want to go look at the weather to figure out if I should take an umbrella. I want my umbrella connected to the web, and I want it to glow a color on the way out the door so that I don't have to think about it. I want my dryer to coordinate with the power company and be energy efficient on its own. I want my schedule to determine, to coordinate with my car so I don't have to type in navigation. So the removal of steps is my 5-year horizon. That's my dream in life. My 10-year version is I'd like to see the software developers get together with the deep scientists, and I would like all of the apps, the collective knowledge to be put into apps that are real time, that would allow us to take most of the impediments that we're born with and level the playing field. Nobody should be mathematically impaired because you should have onboard capabilities to deal with math. You shouldn't be language impaired. You should have those things on your fingertips. And so 10 years from now, I actually believe it. I believe that you're going to be able to take most of the things that you're not good at and be good at it. And I'm going to give you the flip side. As I was listening to Jeremy, the one thing I worry about is with all the complexity, simplification comes, and with simplification, a curator arrives. And I don't want a curator. I don't want the web curated. I don't want, it's fascinating, and you laugh for a little while, and you get these things that figure you out, and then all of a sudden, everything I'm looking at is presented in a relevant fashion. And then I say, well, where's the quirky stuff? And where's the stuff that makes me be different than me? And then you don't stretch. And I worry about that. And so, in my dream world, the 5-year and 10-year horizon are beautiful places, but there are some bumps in the road. And I think one of them is complexity curated equals a narrowing, and I'm back to being taught something.
So in your 5-year time horizon, you want to take humans out of computing and have the machines talk to one another to your benefit.
Think of it as steps removal, right? If you think about all the things that happen, just think about what it used to be to get a map and figure out where you're going, and what you did on a long trip versus a short trip, and getting directions from someone. And is it the White House you turn at, or is it the picket fence? And so we got MapQuest, and we said, oh, this is so great. So I can type it in, and then I take all of the writing steps out. And now you get it, you say, well, now I don't have to take it on paper and print it. I take that out, put it on a mobile phone, then I put it in the car. And I'm saying, why doesn't it go directly from, why do I have any involvement whatsoever? So I want to be involved in less and less, right? And so right now, I'm just engaged in too many things. I'm trying to get my social network smaller, get fewer friends, deeper relationships. So I'm running counter trend on all of this stuff, by the way.
So Derek and Jeremy, John gave an example of something he's worried about. What are each of you worried about?
Yeah, fire away. I'll worry about something other than what you're worrying about.
You have enough worries that you can change on the fly.
Yeah, interchangeable worries, exactly.
I guess the thing that I worry a lot about is just, especially from a U.S. perspective, remaining competitive globally. And there's so many things going on across where we operate in the ecosystem that continue to have the right incentives in line for driving the types of investments we make. I mean, we're investing 20% of our revenue every year in R&D, which is enormous. And we can only do that and satisfy our shareholders as long as they believe that there's a return to those investments. And it's very, very competitive when you're trying to take your technology around the world. And so I think to me, making sure that the U.S., as we like to call it, a knowledge-based economy, we aren't doing things here that undercut the ability for us to remain relevant, worldwide, where a lot of the growth is going to come from, frankly.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll divide it in sort of two categories, right? There are obviously in the media industry, given what's going on, all kinds of worries that we have around business models and how we make money in the future and all these types of things. But those are all pretty well documented. The thing that we worry about the most is finding enough great storytellers. I mean, creating hit programming is like drilling for oil. You get a lot of dry wells before you ultimately get a show that's a hit. Right? It's hard to make a Game of Thrones. I mean, that's really, really hard, not only to secure the rights for it, but to find the creative talent to tell stories like that. you can't bottle it and resell that kind of stuff. There's very few people that are able to do that. And the playing field in terms of who can now distribute content and who can make networks available is larger than it's ever been, right? It's not 4 broadcast networks. It's not 4 broadcast networks plus a couple hundred cable networks. The ability for people to tell stories and deliver those, via the internet or other platforms is becoming unlimited. And we're going to have to make sure that our voice remains relevant now and well into the future to make sure people want to watch our programming. At the end of the day, for a content company, it's really pretty simple, right? You want to put things on television or on a phone or a tablet that people want to watch. You want to get paid for it, and there's all these technical challenges and all these other things. But as the content creators always remind the business folks like myself and the company, you got to have a show that somebody wants. They got to like it, or guess what? It gets canceled after 2 episodes.
Up front, we have a question. We have a microphone coming up to you.
Thank you. My name's Carrie Russell. I'm from the American Library Association. I wanted you to, if you can, talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities you see in meeting the needs of people with disabilities.
Good question.
One of the things that we've been leading the industry on is closed captioning. So we've had to make sure that closed captioning is available on the platforms by which we distribute both our simulcasted content as well as our on-demand content. And we've done that. As we move forward, there are new rules that are being considered about additional closed captioning for short-form clips and other things. And if those get decided that we need to do that, we will certainly do that and proceed in that fashion. So it's now essentially part of the workflow as to how we distribute content. It's a core requirement of distributing video.
I would say for us, we have a number of initiatives underway where we really try to look at the benefits of bringing mobile into different environments. And we've talked about education earlier, healthcare more broadly, but in particular with the disabled and elderly, we've had a number of programs where we've done to try to show the power of kind of remote monitoring and access to information, especially in some rural parts of the U.S. as well as some of the emerging markets where there's much less access to healthcare. And I think those things, as I said before, I think are very powerful broadly across healthcare, but in particular in that segment.
For us, the FCC passed a rule a couple of years ago that requires us to take all of our products and ensure that they meet a requirement. And right now, I think our process by which we do that is world-class. Last year, we had 11,000 requests come through the front door of that organization to make sure that it was well-designed and properly designed. So for us, it's part of everything that we produce. It's part of our standard process. The same way we have a regulatory checklist, we have a checklist item that we go through a process. And so most of the things that we do are carefully thought out against all of those dimensions.
So Jeremy was mentioning closed captioning. I have to announce one complaint I have on this front, not with Jeremy, but with TV stations. They have so much stuff on the screen now that they often cover up the closed captioning. Mm-hmm. So like if I'm at the gym watching something or just, it's hard. So I wish they would work on that. Other questions? Actually, maybe we could go over here. There's a gentleman here.
Hi, my name is George Galt. I'm an attorney in private practice.
And if you could hold the microphone.
Sure. John, just one comment. Your idea of curation, I think, is right on point. It was well worth coming here just to hear that. My question is really more about, you all sort of assume very much a broadcast kind of construct for the network of a single point of content origination and distribution out to many points. I noticed an article, I believe last week or the week before, about Netflix considering a peer-to-peer construct. Is there anything, do you see the broadcast kind of construct going away? How do you feel about peer-to-peer constructs, obviously leaving aside the sort of more nefarious aspects of it? But if I could get some comments on that, thank you.
We've actually used peer-to-peer to deliver video for several years, so it's not a new thing for us. It was a mechanism to optimize bandwidth and be able to get video delivered over multiple platforms. We're pretty flexible in our approach. We don't look at peer-to-peer and say, well, that's the solution, and you should always use peer-to-peer. But the network business, and obviously John runs one of the largest ones in the world, is changing pretty dramatically. So the need for it is in some ways less than it was before, because there are different types of relationships that you can have with network providers that have minimized the requirement for it. Obviously the primary thing that it was generated from were more nefarious things, and so that sort of goes without saying. We're not a big fan of its use for the purposes of content piracy.
I think there's actually pretty interesting potential play there. We've actually been investing in this technology we call LTE Direct, which is actually part of the LTE standard, and it provides peer-to-peer communication. Assuming you could get comfortable with all the digital right management issues, I think that could be one in various situations where, whether it's locally generated content on the device that you want to share, which has much, doesn't really have those issues, or actually commercial content, I think that could be an interesting way to deal with load issues on the network in various times. And then the point I talked about earlier with LTE broadcast, which is not a dedicated broadcast network, but part of the LTE network, being able to dedicate, whether for sporting events or whatever it is, you know that there's a bunch of people in a given area that want to watch the same thing at the same time, and being able to dynamically tune your network to provide that content one time. I think those types of things are pretty powerful and have a place somewhere down the line.
There's a lot of complex technology that is involved here, and I mentioned earlier the business models. I mean, when you look at today's world, there's situations when you need to move a tennis ball through a straw, and that's not an easy thing to do. So you innovate, and you say, let's pre-position it and reassemble the tennis ball on the other end of the straw where you have a bigger pipe and it can fit through. But there are other things that are in the business model. So if you look at Jeremy's world today, I have to move a physical copy per person of everything that gets DVR'd, and 40% of it never gets watched. So
that's not our programming, though. That's
the other guy's programs. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Or ours.
Right.
Yeah. So it is a complex ecosystem. We're all involved. We're all in the middle of the discussion, and people want to promote their own positions, and that's natural, and they'll do it. But at the end of the day, you have to march the policy alongside the practical nature of what the consumers are doing, alongside the business models that get you there. Because every night between the hours of 7 and 9, when my network's at its peak usage in the home, I'm sending physical copies that are being recorded on a DVR that'll never get watched. But the business model, calls for that. And so, it's a complex subject where you can't jump right to peer-to-peer, because there are certain things that have digital rights management, and we need validation, and did you pay your bill, and are you subscribed to that? And that complexity wherein lies a lot of the debate and discussion, and it needs to occur, because we're going into a new world, and the new world is very, very different than the world any of us grew up in.
So you mentioned the word policy. So we are doing this event in Washington, D.C. Each of you live outside of Washington, D.C. If you had some time with President Obama, and there's opportunity to give him one bit of advice, what would it be? I know it's hard to narrow it down to one thing, but.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a big one.
I'm not sure any of us want to answer that question.
Yeah, no, I'll jump in. I don't mind answering any question. I think when you look at the industry of communications, media, and entertainment, investment's critical. So if we can get policies such that we can create certainty, then investment follows, and with investment comes jobs, and with jobs comes results, and then we maintain world leadership. And I think that's an important cycle that we have to carefully nurture, so that we don't end up having any constituency disrupt that in a way that would threaten it. And I think Derek talked about it earlier, whether it's his big R&D dollars or our big capital dollars, frankly, it's roughly the same percentage, it's just different accounting. Those flow to certain returns, and your shareholders expect it, and money is fungible to move across countries and here and there, and that ecosystem of investment we need to sustain. And that has to be carefully thought of in this industry because we have global leadership.
I knew I should have gone first. You took my point.
They just say ditto.
Yeah. I'm going to say ditto plus one other thing, which is, it's all about balance, as we know. I mean, there's, that's the point of trying to form policy is balance all the interests that are involved. But I also think, we have, our administration, our government has a responsibility to, understand how they're viewed externally. And there's certainly many places outside of the U.S. where statements that are made by, whether it's regulators here in the U.S. or others, that may not be intended to hit that result, are picked up and then built upon, to try to achieve an agenda that might be different in some other places outside of the U.S. So I think we have to, while we're trying to debate what's the best result here in the U.S., we also need to be thinking about what is the impact of the things that are being said and done by our government outside of the U.S. and how that impacts U.S. business.
Yeah, I think I'm going to punt on the policy question and just say I hope he does his brackets on March Madness on TBS next year.
Okay. We have time for one last question. There's a question back there.
Srinivas Bala from Light Squared. As an end consumer, we have plenty of choices on TV. We have choices on voice on wireless side. When it comes to broadband, on average, we have at the most two. One's the cable provider, the other could be the UVers or Fios. How do you make this better? Clearly, within the FCC's ruling on net neutrality, the broadband guys have a huge pricing power now. And this is exactly what the Sprint CEO, when he was in DC in March, was complaining a lot. And back to you, John, is how do you make the wireless networks as an alternate broadband provider, knowing that a household uses 30 gigabytes of data, which is clearly not possible from the wireless side of the business?
Well, it sounds like the same question you asked the last time, reconstituted. So maybe I should just give you the same answer, reconstituted. When you look at the supply and demand, we're in a business where there's an economy of scale. And if you look at the consumers in the U.S., the price curve on a per bit basis and on a per consumption of anything has gone down at a level that's the envy of the rest of the world. And so you have a natural propensity to scale. And then the question is, how in the ecosystem do you innovate, and how do you balance innovation versus the benefits of scale and cost? But if you look at things like smartphone penetration and you compare this to the rest of the world, and then you look at the average consumption and the number of apps that people consume, the system's working. It is working. And so I do think that at any point in time, you're going to have players and actors in this play who will look for a policy advantage to assist their business model, and that's natural. And I think that's why Washington has what it has as a political system that engenders that debate. But it is a business that at its infrastructure level, with real estate, concrete, fiber, digging ditches, electronics, technicians, hard hats, real jobs, well-paying jobs, that stuff operates at a cycle and at a pace where scale matters. And it matters and it manifests into lower cost and more choice for the customer. And so the choice isn't always going to be measured, the quality of that choice, by the numbers of providers of various services. It's by the utility that it's providing, the proliferation of innovation on that utility, and what my cost is doing every year. And that's the balance that as an industry we must strike.
Okay, I will make that the benediction on this event, but I want to thank John, Derek, and Jeremy for sharing your views with us, and I thank you very much for coming out. We really appreciate it.